It was raining the morning of my father's funeral. Not a light cinematic drizzle. It was one of those cold, sideways rains that feels personal, like the sky itself is angry. I stood in a black suit that didn't quite fit anymore, soaked to the bone, staring up at the gates of the house I'd grown up in, a $70 million mansion that now looked more like a fortress. I hadn't been back in 5 years. Not since the arguments. Not since Dad married her. The gates didn't open when I pressed the call button. Instead, a voice buzzed through the speaker, clipped, cold, unmistakably hers. "Alec, you're not on the guest list. The ceremony's at St. Agnes. This is a private residence now." Private residence? My hands clenched around the steel bars. "This was my father's house, Sarah." A pause, then, "Not anymore." The line cut. I stared at the speaker, heart pounding. The world around me was wet asphalt and silence, except for the occasional roll of thunder. I could have climbed the damn gate, and a few years ago, I would have. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I was a former naval officer with a record of command and enough self-control not to make a scene at his father's funeral. So, I turned around and drove to the church. St. Agnes was filled with polite whispers, the scent of lilies, and people I barely recognized. I sat next to my sister Ellie, who had flown in from Boston the night before. She looked like a ghost, pale, shaken, her long brown hair pulled into a trembling ponytail. She squeezed my hand as the priest spoke. Sarah sat in the front row, draped in black like a widow from a magazine. Beside her was Brendan, her son from a previous marriage. His posture was perfect, expression unreadable, but I could feel him watching me from the corner of his eye, like he was guarding something. After the service, there were handshakes, condolences, and then the reading of the will. That's when everything started falling apart. We were in the small chapel office. An attorney none of us knew sat at the desk, clearing his throat before unfolding the papers. Sarah and Brendan sat across from Ellie and me. "I'll make this brief," the lawyer began. "This is the last will and testament of Mr. James Wallace, executed 3 months prior to his death." 3 months? I blinked. That was during the period no one could reach him. He'd stopped answering calls, claimed he was focusing on treatment. The lawyer continued. "Mr. Wallace leaves the entirety of his estate, including real property, liquid assets, and trust holdings, to Mrs. Sarah Wallace." In full, my ears started ringing. "In full?" I asked, my voice low. The lawyer nodded. "There are no provisions made for any other parties." Ellie gasped. That can't be right. Our dad he wouldn't do that." Sarah didn't even pretend to look surprised. Brendan leaned back in his chair, arms folded, lips twitching slightly, like this was some game they'd already won. I stood up, heart pounding. "Where's Mr. Harrow, my father's longtime attorney? He handled every legal matter for 20 years. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Harrow was replaced earlier this year." Ellie turned to Sarah, voice cracking. "You cut everyone out, didn't you? Even his own friends, his doctors, his kids." Sarah met her gaze, calm as glass. "Your father made the decisions he thought were best. It's unfortunate you can't accept them." I nearly lunged across the table. "You locked me out of my own home on the day we buried him." Sarah's tone didn't change. "That home is no longer yours, Alec." I clenched my jaw. The rage was a storm behind my ribs, but I kept it inside, just barely. We left the church without another word. Back in the car, Ellie stared out the window, silent tears running down her face. She looked like a little girl again, the one who used to wait for me to walk her home from school. "She changed everything," Ellie said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She waited until he was too sick to fight it, then rewrote our lives. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't agree, but because I was already calculating, already thinking of every call, every signature, every record that might prove what Sarah had done. If she thought it was over, she didn't know me, and she didn't know what Dad had told me the last time we spoke. A man protects what matters most, even after he's gone. I looked out the window at the mansion on the hill, its lights glowing like a warning, and I knew I was going to burn her whole story to the ground. If you believe family should never be for sale, like this video and subscribe. The truth is just beginning. The next morning, I drove straight to Arlington, to the office of Arthur Crane, my father's closest friend and former legal counsel. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Not since Sarah fired half of Dad's staff and replaced the rest with people loyal only to her. Arthur greeted me with a solemn handshake, his face thinner than I remembered, eyes tired but sharp. He was in his early 70s now, but still kept the firm air of someone who'd never stopped asking questions. "I was wondering how long it would take you to come," he said quietly, ushering me into his office. "She locked me out," I said. "Of the house. Of everything." Arthur nodded once, then opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. It was labeled Wallace, James, Trust Revision, Draft. "She started isolating him about 6 months ago," Arthur said, sitting down across from me. "First, she changed the primary care team, then the house staff, then blocked my calls." "What is this?" I asked, flipping through the documents. "It's what your father intended before Sarah got her claws in deep," Arthur said. 2 years ago, he came to me. He wanted to ensure that you and Ellie would inherit the bulk of the estate. He feared Sarah would try something if anything ever happened to him. I paused. So he knew. He suspected. We began drafting a trust, irrevocable, airtight. But then, out of nowhere, he told me to halt everything. Said he was working on something privately with Sarah's new advisors. That was the last time I heard from him. I gritted my teeth. "That doesn't sound like my father." "No," Arthur agreed, "it doesn't, which is why I never closed the file." He slid the folder across the table. "This isn't legally binding, but it proves intent. He didn't want her to have it all." "What about the new will?" Arthur shook his head. "I haven't seen it. If it was done through someone Sarah hired, it might have been executed under duress. But unless we can prove he wasn't of sound mind, or find a witness willing to testify, it's your word against hers." I nodded slowly, scanning the documents again. Some of the wording was familiar. My father's voice echoed in every clause. "The estate shall prioritize the long-term well-being and education of my children. Alexandra and Eleanor Wallace." It was him. "She's hiding something," I said. Arthur leaned in. "You'll need to dig. If there's any chance she coerced him or forged a signature, we have to find out how. Start with the people she fired, the people she tried to silence." "Who's her attorney?" I asked. "Some hotshot from New York, Charles Harlan. Big firm, expensive, cold, of course." Sarah never played small. I left Arthur's office with the folder clutched under my arm like a weapon. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop, pulling every file I could find. Bank records, property transfers. I found a document that chilled me. A transfer of control over one of Dad's smaller investment accounts, dated 6 weeks before his death. And the signature, it looked right, too right, like someone had copied it from another document. I needed a second opinion. I called Ellie. She answered on the first ring. "Alec, I think she forged something," I said. "I need your help." She was silent for a moment, then, "Tell me what to do." We spent the next 3 days digging. Ellie tracked down Dad's nurse from the palliative care clinic, a woman named Teresa, who had been with him during the final months. She agreed to meet. Teresa sat across from us in a quiet cafe outside Fairfax. Mid-50s, steady voice, but you could tell she'd seen more suffering than most. "I remember your father well," she said. "Sharp mind until near the end." "Was he lucid when he signed papers?" I asked directly. She hesitated. "That depends." He had moments of clarity, but toward the last 2 months he was heavily medicated, confused. He thought I was your mother once, called me by her name. Ellie inhaled sharply. Teresa lowered her voice. "I saw Sarah bring him documents, more than once. She'd sit beside the bed and hold the pen for him. He couldn't lift his arms properly." "Did he know what he was signing?" I asked. "I don't believe he did." She looked at me, eyes steady. "But you didn't hear that from me." That was enough, not for court, but enough for me. 2 days later, I drove to the old storage unit my father used for decades. I'd called the manager, an old Marine buddy of his who still ran the place. He met me at the gate, shook my hand, and opened the locker. Inside were crates, boxes labeled with numbers, a small safe, and a sealed envelope. I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated nearly a year before Dad died. "Alec, if something happens to me and Sarah starts acting like this place is hers, fight. Not for the money, for what it means, for what it was built on. I'm trying to fix things before it's too late. Don't let her erase what we built. Don't let her erase your mother. Love, Dad." I sat on the cold concrete floor, the letter shaking in my hands. He knew. He knew what was coming, and he tried to stop it. This wasn't about greed. This wasn't about property. This was war. And I wasn't going to lose. I didn't sleep that night. The letter from Dad was still in my hand when the sun started to rise, my knuckles white, the words burned into memory. Don't let her erase what we built. It wasn't just instruction. It was a plea, a final mission, one I had failed to receive in time, but not too late to act on. I called Arthur Crane first thing that morning. "We need to move," I told him. "There's a pattern, the fake will, the account transfers, the nurse's testimony, and now this letter. It's not enough on its own, but it's something." He agreed. "I'll start filing a preliminary injunction. We need to freeze the estate. If we wait too long, she'll liquidate everything." "She's already selling Dad's vintage cars," I said. I saw a listing under Brendan's name for the Shelby Mustang. That was Mom's favorite. Arthur swore under his breath. We decided on a plan. Step 1, file to challenge the will. Step 2, gather evidence of coercion or forgery. Step 3, track down witnesses. Sarah couldn't silence, people who'd seen Dad in those last months, people who could speak to his state of mind. I called Ellie that afternoon. She was back at college, trying to focus on her finals, but I knew she hadn't slept much either. "She took Mom's paintings off the walls," she said, her voice brittle. "The ones in the west hallway, I saw them listed at auction. Sarah didn't even wait for the will to cool." I took a breath. "Ellie, we're going to court." There was a long silence. Then, softly, "Good." The next few weeks were a storm of paperwork, lawyer calls, and long nights digging through Dad's past. I called former house staff, old friends, anyone who might have seen something. Most had been paid off or were too afraid to talk. But then one name came up again and again. Clara Jackson, the housekeeper who had worked for Dad for over 15 years. She'd suddenly quit 6 months before his death. I found her in a small condo outside Richmond, living with her sister. When I knocked on her door, she opened it just a crack, but when she saw my face, her eyes welled up. "Mr. Alec," she said quietly, "I was hoping you'd come." She let me in without asking why I was there. We sat at her tiny kitchen table, a teacup between us, untouched. "Your father loved you and your sister so much," Clara said. "He used to walk around the garden in the mornings talking to your mother like she was still there. He'd say, 'Barbara, I hope the kids are proud of me.'" I swallowed hard. "I quit because of her," Clara continued. "Sarah. She started watching me like a hawk. Told me I couldn't let you or Ellie into the house. One day, I found her going through your father's desk. She was shredding something, looked like a legal envelope. When she saw me, she smiled and said I'd be getting a nice little severance soon." "Do you remember what the envelope said?" I asked. Clara nodded. "I only saw the corner. It said Crane and Harrow Arthur's firm. She had destroyed evidence. That's not all," Clara added. "I heard her one night on the phone. She was talking to someone, said she had to clean up Dad's signature because it was too shaky, said no one would believe he was in his right mind." I leaned forward. "Would you say that in court?" Clara looked down at her hands, then back up at me, eyes steady. "I'll say whatever I have to. Your father deserves that." Arthur filed the petition to freeze the estate the next day. He also filed a formal challenge to the will, citing suspected coercion and mental incompetence at time of signing. Within hours, we got a response from Sarah's attorney, a cease and desist letter accusing us of defamation, harassment, and causing undue stress to a grieving widow. Classic. But the court agreed to a temporary freeze. No assets could be transferred or sold until the matter was reviewed. Sarah was furious. She called me that evening, first time I'd heard her voice since the funeral. "You're really doing this?" she said, skipping any pleasantries. "Dragging your father's memory through the mud?" "I'm protecting it," I replied. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, sharp, controlled. "You always were a self-righteous little soldier. You think you're the only one who loved him? He chose me. He trusted me." "No," I said. "He feared you. He tried to stop you, and I'll prove it." She hung up. The next day, I got a call from a man named Graham Adler, Dad's former financial advisor. He'd been replaced 6 months before Dad died without explanation. "I saw the news," he said. "Sarah's name all over your father's holdings now. That's not right." "Did you speak with my dad during that time?" I asked. Briefly, he seemed confused. Couldn't remember numbers he used to know by heart. He asked me why his passwords weren't working. "What did you do?" "Sent an email to Arthur Crane, but never got a response. Figured I was cut out." He paused. "But Alec, I saved the email, time-stamped, forwarded, and I have voice messages. He called me 3 days before he passed." My pulse quickened. "Can you send me everything?" "I already did," he said. "Check your inbox." I opened my laptop and there it was, a voice message from my father, hoarse and weak. "Graham, I don't know what's happening. Sarah says it's for the best, but I think I made a mistake. I need you to talk to Alec." I played it again and again. It was enough. Not a smoking gun, maybe, but proof. My father knew something was wrong. Now the court would too. Sarah didn't waste time. Within days of the estate being frozen, she launched a counteroffensive that was as ruthless as it was calculated. Her legal team filed a motion to unfreeze the assets, citing emotional distress, financial harm, and accusing me of conducting a vindictive crusade rooted in jealousy and male entitlement. They weren't just trying to win, they were trying to bury me. Her lead attorney, Charles Harlan, looked like he was carved from granite. Every word he said in court dripped with contempt, like I was some spoiled child throwing a tantrum over a lost toy. He painted Sarah as a loyal, grieving widow, and me as a bitter, estranged son trying to undo his father's final wishes. For a while, it worked. The judge allowed a partial unfreeze, enough for Sarah to access a monthly allowance and pay her legal fees. She immediately ramped up the PR campaign too. Articles began surfacing online. War hero son challenges will of dying father. Family torn apart by greed. Someone even leaked photos from my time in service, twisted them into tales of trauma and instability. But I stayed focused, because we had something they didn't. Truth. Arthur moved quickly to schedule a deposition with Clara Jackson, the former housekeeper. She was nervous, but determined. When she spoke, she painted a picture that left no doubt in the court's mind. Sarah had isolated my father, micromanaged every visitor, and destroyed documents tied to his previous estate plans. And then came the break we hadn't dared hope for. The notary. His name was Patrick Eames, a soft-spoken man in his early 60s with a limp from an old back injury and hands that trembled slightly when he shook mine. Arthur found him through the state notary registry. We had subpoenaed every name associated with documents filed around the time of the new will. At first, Patrick didn't want to talk, but once he realized what had happened, once he understood that my father's voice had been erased, he agreed to testify. "I was brought to the house by Brendan," he said, sitting in Arthur's conference room, hands folded tightly. "He said Mr. Wallace needed help signing a new will, but when I arrived, James was vacant. He didn't respond when I introduced myself." His eyes were open but unfocused. I remember thinking he looked more sedated than sick. "Did he sign in front of you?" Arthur asked. Patrick hesitated. "Not exactly. Sarah guided his hand. Literally, she held the pen with him. I thought it was just to help with tremors, but..." He swallowed. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge the documents. It felt wrong. I didn't want to be there. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "I needed the job," he said simply, "but I've carried that moment with me every day since." His statement changed everything. Suddenly, Sarah's version of events began to unravel. The court ordered the will to be reviewed for forensic analysis. And guess what? The signature didn't match prior authenticated documents. It was close, but under magnification the tremor lines didn't match, suggesting it had been guided. Sarah's lawyers tried to block the report from being entered into evidence. They failed. Then, almost as if fate had a sense of humor, a package arrived at Arthur's office. It came from a firm in New Jersey, Crosby and Denton, estate lawyers my father had worked with years ago. Inside was a certified copy of a trust, dated 22 months before my father's death. It had never been revoked. It had never been superseded, and in it, my father's true wishes. The trust left the estate to Eleanor and me. It was signed, notarized, and recorded, airtight. It explicitly stated that no subsequent wills shall override the terms of this trust unless expressly dissolved by the grantor in writing and in sound mind. Arthur's hands trembled when he read it. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. I nodded. "The will doesn't matter anymore." We filed the trust documents with the court the next morning. Sarah lost her composure for the first time during the hearing. She stood up, red-faced, shouting that it was a fake, that my father had changed his mind, that we were all vultures picking at the bones of a man who loved her. The judge calmly told her to sit down. The court ordered a temporary transfer of estate control to a neutral third-party administrator until final rulings could be made. But we knew the war was already won. The mask had slipped. The truth was now on paper, in sworn testimony, and echoing in the courtroom like a verdict already spoken. She couldn't erase what we built. She couldn't erase us. The courtroom felt colder that day. Maybe it was the rain again, thick, slanted, relentless. Or maybe it was just the look on Sarah's face as the judge ordered the trust be recognized as the primary estate document. Her eyes, usually polished and impenetrable, flickered. Just once. But I saw it. She knew she was losing. The court ruled that pending a full review, all actions based on the contested will would be frozen. The trust, Dad's original intent, would take temporary legal precedence. That meant Sarah's access to the accounts was cut. The mansion, locked, the auctioned assets, recalled. Every dollar Brendan had touched was now under scrutiny. I walked out of the courthouse and exhaled for the first time in weeks. Ellie called me from campus. She had heard the news from Arthur. "She's not getting away with it, is she?" she asked. "No," I said. "She's already gone. She just doesn't know it yet." Sarah tried to fight back. She filed an appeal, claimed Dad wasn't of sound mind when he signed the trust, that he had been manipulated by Arthur Crane, by us, even by Clara. But too many pieces were already in place. The letter from Dad, the voice message to Graham, the notary's testimony, Clara's sworn affidavit. And then came the final blow. Poetic, really. Arthur received a call from Crosby and Denton, the firm that had preserved the original trust. They had found something else, a post-dated letter from my father, mailed to them 6 months after the trust was signed. It confirmed his intention not to dissolve it, despite domestic pressure and medical interference. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were unmistakable. "I fear my wife has begun working with outside interests. If anything changes, know that I do not rescind the trust. My children deserve to inherit what their mother helped me build." That was it. Sarah's attorneys began pulling back. Quietly. First, the PR team stopped issuing statements. Then Brendan, smug, arrogant Brendan, removed all his social media. And finally, we got a message from Harlan. "My client is willing to discuss a settlement." Arthur smiled when he read it. Translation: she knows it's over. The final court hearing was a formality. The judge ruled the will invalid due to lack of capacity and coercion. The trust was upheld. The estate, all $70 million of it, was returned to the original beneficiaries, Alex and Eleanor Wallace. Sarah was granted a modest stipend, exactly what the trust had allotted her in the case of my father's passing. Enough to live, but not lavishly. Brendan? Nothing. Not a dollar. The judge even questioned whether he had illegally profited from prior asset sales. An investigation was opened. They were evicted from the house the following week. I didn't go to watch, but Ellie did. She sent me a photo, Sarah standing at the gates of the mansion, 2 suitcases by her side, watching as a security team locked the entrance behind her. Brendan sat on the curb, staring at his phone like the world had glitched and forgotten who he was. Ellie's text came with just 2 words: "We're home." We drove back together 2 days later. The house was quiet when we arrived, cold but not empty. The air felt different, like it had been holding its breath this whole time, waiting to exhale. Ellie walked the halls in silence. She stopped by the west corridor, where Mom's paintings used to hang. Most had been recovered. One was still missing, but we were working on it. In Dad's study, the desk was as he'd left it years ago. I opened the drawer, the one Sarah never found. Inside were 3 things: a pocket watch engraved with the initials JW, the same one Dad gave me before I joined the Navy. A photo of him and Mom standing under the magnolia tree in the garden. A sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it slowly. Alec. If you're reading this, it means you fought back. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you and your sister myself, but I never stopped believing in you. You and Ellie are what I'm proudest of. This house, this legacy, it's not about money, it's about family. And that doesn't mean blood, it means loyalty, love, integrity. Don't let pain turn you cruel. Be better than I was. Be the man your mother saw in you. And keep her spirit alive in this place. I love you. Dad. I don't remember crying. I just remember the feeling of everything inside me finally settling. That night, Ellie and I sat on the back porch, watching the lights of the city below. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Justice doesn't always come in sirens and headlines. Sometimes it's quiet, personal, unmistakable. We were home. And Sarah, she was gone, one part left. And it's not just about revenge. It's about what you do once the battle's over. Like and subscribe. Part 6 is where healing begins. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It had taken weeks to clean out the remnants of Sarah's reign, the sterile art she'd hung to erase our mother, the cold designer furniture, the locked drawers filled with contracts and invoices. But once it was gone, what remained was something far more powerful. Home. Ellie returned from school early that spring. She had decided to take a semester off. Not out of stress, but because she said something inside her had shifted. "We fought so hard to get it back," she said one morning over coffee. "Now, I want to do something that honors it." I knew what she meant, because I felt it too. We didn't want to live in the mansion. That wasn't the point. That wasn't why we'd fought. What mattered was what Dad always said. A man protects what matters most, even after he's gone. So we made a decision. Together, we converted the mansion into something new, not a museum, not a private retreat, but a foundation. We called it the Wallace House, a nonprofit retreat and mentorship center for children of military families who had lost a parent. A place where they could stay, heal, dream. Where no one would question their grief, and no one would try to buy their silence. We cleared out the east wing, turned it into dorm rooms. Ellie helped design a study hall. I built a garden in the back, where Dad used to sit in the mornings with his coffee. We framed a photo of Mom and Dad and hung it in the main hallway. Beneath it, we placed a simple plaque that read, "For those who give everything, and those left behind to remember them." The first group of kids arrived in May, 12 of them. Some barely old enough to tie their shoes, some already teenagers with silent eyes and shoulders too heavy for their age. They arrived with duffel bags and guarded hearts, and slowly they began to laugh. Ellie ran the art program. I taught basic leadership, discipline, and confidence, but mostly we just listened. And somehow, in their stories, in their scars, I found a kind of peace I didn't know I needed. One afternoon, I walked through the garden and heard laughter. Not Ellie's, not mine, children, running through the grass, playing hide-and-seek around the magnolia tree, the same tree where my parents had posed for that photo, the one Dad planted when Ellie was born. I stood there for a while, no phone, no noise, no headlines or legal filings, just wind, sunlight, and the unmistakable sound of life returning to a place that had been so close to ruin. Later that night, I found Ellie sitting on the porch, legs tucked under her sketchbook in her lap. She looked at me and smiled. "You think he'd be proud?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out across the garden, where lights from the house glowed warm through the dusk, and nodded. He already was. We sat in silence, watching the stars come out. Not everything had healed. Not yet. But the war was over. The house and the legacy behind it had survived, and so had we. Thank you for watching this story through to the end. If you believe that truth matters more than money, give this video a like. Subscribe for more true stories.